Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rood, one of the very first things you said was a deterrent capability is job one. I think you said our primary strategy is deterrence, and if deterrence doesn't work, to win. Let me focus on a particular issue of deterrence that I've been doing a lot of work on and am puzzling about, and that is cyber deterrence. And particularly cyber deterrence, I would call it below the threshold of catastrophe. In other words, a cyber attack that disables our entire electric grid, I think everyone would agree deserves a clear and unequivocal response. What about a cyber attack that freezes the voter registration lists in Florida a week before the election? How do we deter those kinds of attacks? My sense is we've had Sony, we've had OPM, we've had 2016 with very little, if any, substantive response, and that our adversaries don't fear us, to put it most bluntly, in terms of cyber attacks on this country. Give me some thoughts about cyber deterrence. The National Commission on the Defense Strategy last year said the U.S. is not deterring its adversaries as effectively as it should in cyberspace. In realizing we're on a very limited time, but give me a minute or so of your thoughts on that, and perhaps then you could follow up.
Yes, Senator, and I recall you raising this with me during my confirmation visit with you, and it's something you've been a leader on in pursuing this type of activity. I would say since that time, you and I met 2 years ago. We have put in place now a cyber strategy, and one of the primary aspects of that is it calls about defending forward. We will no longer wait if we're observing indications of planning for an attack for an adversary to spring that attack. If they're doing the equivalent of stockpiling cyber weapons to deploy at a later date, we'll not wait to receive that attack in our networks and then try to deal with it, but rather we will defend forward. And that's one of the ways that we think we can deter by denial of objectives. You're exactly right. There needs to be, and part of any deterrence, the ability to impose costs on an attacker or an adversary in order to dissuade them. We have
the adversary has to feel there's some risk in order to affect their calculus of whether or not to attack. Is that correct?
Yes, and the at risk can be both through cyber means and other means, and that is part of our approach. Where you mentioned some of the difficulties where you've been puzzling through that is, as you say, getting the right threshold and thinking through questions of proportionality,
right.
Thinking through questions of how do you produce the right effects, how do you evaluate the effects essentially of your attack. We call it in the physical world, if a bomb was dropped, bomb damage assessment. Use of cyber tools evaluating the effect of those actions and making sure that there's not collateral damage is also quite important, sir.
I appreciate that and hope that perhaps we can follow up with this conversation because this is a very important topic, I believe. Different question, General. Are we adequately confronting new threats? Drone swarms, hypersonics, cyber. Here's an example, and it gets back to money, and we were talking about how much we're spending. We're spending twice as much as China and Russia combined, and I take the chairman's point on that, but still, we're spending 10 times what Russia spends. Putin can hire 12,000 hackers for the cost of one jet fighter. And I think all would agree that what he did in 2016 was pretty effective attack on our country. Are we putting our money in the right places in terms of emerging threats? Hypersonics is a perfect example.
Senator, I would say that the last two budgets started to move that way, and having the National Defense Strategy as a touchstone, as sort of the North Star, is it acts as sort of our conscience, right? So as we look at the development of these systems, I think we are headed in the right direction. Are we going fast enough?
But it bothers me that we're spending 10 times what Russia is, and they're the ones that are fielding a hypersonic missile this year, and we're 4 or 5 years away. How did we miss that?
Well, sorry, I think we have a broader set of global objectives that we need to achieve. And so I think there was also the focus that we've had over the past 20 years before the NDS, and we're transitioning into this new prioritization on great power competition. I think there are a lot of elements that we have within.
Well, I think we have catch-up to do, as I think you've both testified. But I think the area of technology and confronting emerging threats is is a real area where there has to be some good strategic thinking and investments. Final question for the record, because I'm out of time. We haven't talked about it here today. I'm concerned about the possibility of an emergent China-Russia axis. They've been split apart for many years. I'm concerned that to the extent they decide to cooperate against us as a common enemy, that can be a force multiplier. So I'm not asking for an answer now, but I would hope you could give me some thoughts on for the record on the danger and what the intelligence tells us about cooperation and coordination between China and Russia. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.